It is good to be here this morning. It's been a long time. And, we've been through a lot in the last couple of years. So it's good to see you be up here. And Ken, thank you for reading from the orange books. I remember those orange books from my parents reading those to me. So I'm glad somebody still has a few of those around. So that's really cool. And thank you for that. So those bedtime stories were a really great part of my growing up years, and I actually remember that story. So I'm like, I know where this is going. So that's very cool. Before we begin, my wife and I would like to, I'm going to come down here just for a moment. And I was hoping that someone special would be here today. And Jesse's here today. He doesn't know I'm going to talk about him, but I'm going to talk about him just for a moment. And I'm not going to ask him to come up here, but he had to depart pastoring very quickly and a little faster than normal, and so we didn't have an opportunity to honor him like we would normally do. So I want to take that moment and do that. So I remember when I was I think it was Andrews University. I'd gotten your resume, and I know that you had great ministry as a dentist before and as a member of the local church. God gets a hold of all of us and moves us into different areas at different times in our lives, and that's what was happening in Jesse's life and his family's life. And so I traveled to Andrews University at the time, and we were interviewing a lot of people, and I remember meeting you there. It was a weird place to do interviews, if I remember right. We were kind of out they just kind of had these guys where you had to sit out in the foyer. It's like doing an interview in the lobby is what it really was. And I remember being very impressed with them and with their passion and their dedication for Jesus. And so, as you have come to the end of this chapter of pastoral ministry, there's still plenty of other ministries to do as well. But we just wanted to honor you from the Washington Conference. And I've had this for a while, wondering when I was going to be able to see you. My administrative assistant ordered this, and it's been sitting on my desk. And I said, someday I know I'm going to speak at Ferndale. And I hope that Jesse is there. So Jesse, in grateful appreciation for your faithful years of service to Jesus Christ and his remnant church. Jesse, well done, good and faithful servant. 521. So good to see you. Now you have a paperweight, right? But just know that it is a true heartfelt appreciation, because your entire pastoral ministry was done in this district right here. So, and that's really rare for pastors these days. So, thank you for all you've done. And I look around, and I peeked in the windows. I saw that you got your kitchen remodel done and a few other things like that. I know you'd talk to me about some of them. So blessings to you as you continue on throughout the next chapter of your life. A few weeks ago, my wife and I were back in my hometown, which is Enterprise, Kansas. And if you know anything about Kansas this time of year, I always wonder, every time I go back to Kansas in July to see my parents, I wonder, why does anybody live here? Tornadoes, exactly. Why does anybody live here? It's hot, it's humid, and it's miserable. And I've lived here long enough now that I'm kind of acclimatized, and I don't want to go back there. But that's the time when I can visit. So I go back there every July, and every July I wonder why I'm here, or why I'm there, I should say. But while I was there, I wandered, my parents are living in the same home where they moved when I was 9 or 10 years old. They're still living in the same house. And same place, many, many wonderful memories there growing up. I had a good childhood. My parents are wonderful individuals. But they don't travel anymore at this stage of life. And so my wife and I, we travel back there to see them. And there is a place just right on the street. They're just kind of like boom, boom, it's right there. That somebody in the ditch one day, some of the neighborhood kids I grew up with, they discovered a tiny little bottle. And it just like they were kind of poking around in the dirt. I don't know if the bottle's neck was poking up out of the dirt or whatever, but they found a tiny little bottle, maybe this tall, and they pulled it out, and it had been there a while. And when those kind of things have been there for a while, they kind of changed colors and did all sorts of cool things in the light. And next thing you know, they were poking around with a stick, and they were getting more bottles out. And next thing you know, the whole neighborhood kids are like, we're all gathered around, and we turned into amateur archaeologists digging in the ditch there, right beside the road, digging in this ditch with our sticks. We went and got old spoons, and we found tiny little shovels, and we were digging around and just having a fun time finding tiny little bottles there. And later on, we realized we were digging in the trash heap, but at that time, we didn't know. Somebody had just thrown stuff over the edge, and we were there having a good time digging up little bottles. And for the longest time, I had these little bottles. I found 3 or 4 of them, and like kids, 4 or 5 days later, we were all done with that project, and we went on about the next thing. But we had these little bottles, and they were just lined up, and we were, some of them were chipped and cracked. Some of them were in perfect condition. Who knows what they were? Were they medicine bottles, somebody's tiny little liquor bottles? We don't know, but we had a lot of fun right there. And just finding all these bottles and this kind of thing. It was just this wonderful little, moment where I have such fond memories of digging with all of my friends in the ditch, in the trash, we found out. They're having a good time. They were our treasures. Treasure bottles. And today we're going to talk about a treasure bottle. A little bottle of alabaster is what our scripture reading says. And this woman comes and she brings this alabaster bottle. In the King James Version that was read, it calls it a box, and in other places, in the other versions, it calls it a flask. We're going to use the term bottle today because that's the word we all know. But bottle. And so in verse 3 it says, and being in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at the table, a woman came having an alabaster flask, I'm reading from the New King James, of very costly oil of spikenard. And she broke the flask and poured it on his head. Now this is a really famous story. We've read this story and many different versions. There's several different versions of it throughout Scripture. Most Christians are familiar with the story, but there's a few things that we want to just talk about a little bit this morning as we think about this bottle and this lady and what was taking place. You see, this particular story is all throughout the Gospels. It's a story of a lady who comes into a home where a meal is being served. Now let's think about who is at that home. It says, first of all, Jesus, it's talking about Jesus Christ is there. It also says Simon the leper was there. And in other versions of the same story, in other Gospels, it says Lazarus was there. Now think about it. If you're going to have a dinner and you want to have some famous people that everybody is talking about come to dinner, this would be it, right? Because you have first of all, you have Simon the leper. He had been healed. And so how many times had they seen that in their lifetime? Wow, this guy had been healed. And so I want to go see this guy. We remember him. He used to be an outcast. He was always over there. We couldn't talk to him. Everywhere he went, he was yelling, unclean, unclean, stand aside. And he was an outcast and he was shunned. And now look at him. He's in perfect shape. He's inviting Jesus to come to his house. That would be great. I'd love to talk to Simon the leper. My wife and I, when we lived in Indonesia, we had lepers around us all the time. And they didn't have to call her unclean. One time we woke up, went out our front door, and there was a leper sleeping on our front porch who'd crawled up over the fence and seeking a place to sleep. So I've seen lepers, and I've seen the ugliness of what it does to a person. And these people had seen that, and they were afraid of it. They thought it was a curse. And here's Simon the leper who was healed. Let's invite him to lunch, although this was him at his home, right? And then it says Lazarus was there. Now, what do we know about Lazarus? He was raised from the dead, right? And so Lazarus is there. And so, if you're going to have a meal ticket to go somewhere, you have a meal ticket where you can sit at the table
with Lazarus, who was raised from the dead. And now, for those of you who wonder, what's the deal? You know, back in the story of Lazarus, it says that he was raised from the dead after he'd been dead how long? 4 days. Why is that important? Because he was really dead, right? I mean, he was really dead. What other time do we know of Jesus raising somebody from the dead? The widow of Nain, right? Yeah, the widow of Nain, and it was her son. But what was the deal? What was the difference between that raising from the dead and the Lazarus? They were on the way to the graveyard. And then there was a little ruler's daughter, the ruler's little daughter. And she had just died. She hadn't been put in the ground yet. And so if you're a conspiracy theorist, and there's been conspiracy theorists all throughout history, guess what? Well, the widow of Nain, maybe he really wasn't dead. He hadn't been in the ground very long. He may have just been unconscious, right? And maybe that the ruler's daughter, maybe she really wasn't dead. You know, so people say, whoa, this guy, we know he was dead. He'd been in the ground for 4 days, because when somebody died in that era, they put him in the ground the same day. There wasn't no waiting, you know, this type of thing. Somebody just passed away. I have to go to a funeral here in about 3 weeks, but he just died yesterday. You know, they didn't do that back then. They put him in the ground that day. They still do that in many Muslim countries overseas. Is if somebody dies, they go to the ground within 24 hours. They got to be dead. That's right. You see? And so this guy, this meal ticket, this ticket to the hottest dinner date in town involved Jesus, who had healed Simon, the leper. It involved Jesus, who had raised Lazarus from the dead after being dead 4 days. And they were there. I mean, that's what was going on. Everybody like, whoa, do you know Simon's there? Lazarus is there? Jesus is there? I wish I could get an invitation to that meal. I'd like to talk to them a little bit. I'd like to talk to Lazarus about what was it like being dead. I always love the fact that nobody knows what it was like being dead, because Lazarus never told us, right? Because he had nothing to say, right? And so that was what was going on. And so then the other people we know that was there, in the Bible, in this version of the story, it doesn't call anybody by name. You read other versions of the story, it calls Mary Magdalene. My wife and I were just at Magdala about 2.5 months ago, a tiny little village, you know, but she was there. She was from there. She wasn't really from there, but that's where she had made her reputation of being an evil woman. That's where she was from. You can go there. My wife and I remember standing beside the synagogue there, which wasn't much bigger than this. It was about the same size, if I remember right, of this sanctuary right here. When my wife and I were sitting there talking about that and thinking how hard in this little tiny village it would have been for her to walk past that sanctuary, walk past that synagogue, and know that the people in there, especially some of the leaders, were the ones that led her into sin, especially in a tiny little village because it was small. So Mary was there, and Mary, she had fallen into sin. She was a sister of Lazarus, a sister of Martha. She was known as a prostitute. So there she was. And now it says that she has this alabaster flask, this bottle. She comes into the room and she pours out the contents of the flask, and the whole room is filled with the aroma. She's faced with scrutiny and criticism. These are all the common things that takes place in that story. But let's take a look at it. I actually looked up where alabaster came from. What is alabaster anyway? You know, and at that time, now there's other places that it's mined now, but at that time, most alabaster was mined in a place in Egypt that was actually called albastron. And that's where it came from. It was a very soft stone that people would carve images out of. They would do all sorts of things. And they also made bottles from it. And it was a very common thing for the bottles to be where they would store their perfume. And so this is where it came. It looks a lot like marble, you know, but it's a lot softer than marble and was easier to carve. And it says it was filled with an expensive perfume. Now, I looked up what spikenard is as well. I thought, what in the world is spikenard? And so I looked up spikenard to see, okay, what is it, what it is. And spikenard, by the way, the word alabaster only is in the Bible in reference to this story. It's the only time you'll see the word alabaster in the Bible. And by the way, you also see the word spikenard or nard only appears 4 times in the Bible, once in the Old Testament, the rest of the time all having to do with the story. So you look it up and say, what in the world is spikenard? And why was it so expensive? And nard was so expensive because it came from the Himalayan mountains. Can you believe it? You look at the map sometime and you say, wow, the Himalayas all the way to the Middle East, and it's really, really expensive stuff. Now I have some here, right here. This is the tourist version of spikenard. You get it from Israel. It's a tourist version. It's not the pure stuff. If you want to smell it afterwards, I could have that do that, or I could just go through and pour it all through the church and smell up the place. If you want me to do that, but I'm not going to. Some of you might be allergic to perfume, so I want to be sensitive to that. But it is still pretty strong, even though this is not the pure version. It's the tourist version of it that you can buy over there. And this is what it was. And what's interesting about these little bottles or these little flasks of spikenard is that 2 different kinds of people had them. They were all wealthy. The wealthy women of the day, the classy women of the day, the uppity ups, the muckety mucks, those women had them, and they wore these around their neck a lot of times as a symbol of their wealth. And look what my husband got me. It's like, whoa, look what I've got, right? In fact, it was so common that the legalist of the day, the rabbis of the day, because they probably bought their wives some, the rabbis of the day, they had made it legal to wear these around your neck even on the Sabbath day. Because see, it wasn't, they said it's really part of your clothing. And you can wear your clothing on the Sabbath day. So this is really part of your clothing. You're really not carrying a bottle around your neck. That's how legalistic they were. You weren't supposed to carry a burden on the Sabbath. And so they made that exception in their little rule book, well, their big rule book, about what you do on the Sabbath. And they said, it's okay for you to carry one of these around your neck. Cool, huh? Kind of legalistic, but that's the way they did it. And guess who else had them? Mary, because she was wealthy, but for a different reason. It was not the muckety mucks. She had that. And probably this was her security blanket. It's like having a 401k. It was a way of investing. Today they say in the marketplaces, they say, you should buy gold as a hedge against inflation. Well, you know what? We all know that as Christians, there is no hedge against what's going to happen at the end of time. But that's what they tell you. So she probably bought this, has poured her life savings into this. How can I save money up for when I'm no longer good at what I do? See what I'm saying? So she had this bottle, however big it was, I don't know, but she had poured a lot of money into this bottle. Then she got to thinking about what Jesus had done for her. She got to thinking about the transformation of what has happened in her life. And I think that as Christians, maybe we should spend a lot more time thinking about what Jesus has done for us. Why do you think that Ellen White says that we should spend a thoughtful hour contemplating the last scenes of Christ's life? And then you put that together with the fact that he did that for you, did it for me. Because when we do that, then we all of a sudden realize that my life savings are really God's life savings. Everything I own, everything that I have, whatever precious coins, and I have a few precious coins I've collected over the years. I kind of enjoy that. I have a few of those things, very few, but I have a few just because they got handed down from grandparent to grandparent, and then they ended up in my possession. Probably not worth that much, but they're worth something to me. But whatever treasures you have, you end up saying, they're nothing in compared to what Jesus did for me. And she had this happen in her life. And she's like, Jesus changed her life. And when you do that, you break whatever box is holding you back and says, I'm all in. I'm giving everything I've got to Jesus. My life savings. Do you see the very fact that when she came into that room, do you understand there was more than just a bottle of spikenard that was broken? When she came into that room, she was already breaking bottles before she broke the bottle. Now stay with me. You see, she was breaking the bottles of a woman of her character and of her status to be even in the room with those men. She shouldn't have been there. She was breaking the bottle of letting down her hair. She was breaking the bottle of women interacting with men and doing this kind of thing. There was so many different statuses that she was breaking while she comes into the room, but she says, nothing is going to stop me from being close to Jesus Christ. She was breaking bottles of protocol. She was breaking bottles of status. She was breaking bottles of probably, discrimination towards women at that time. Just by walking into the room. And then it got more complicated when she broke the bottle and smelled up the place. What I mean? But let me tell you something. When you're walking with Jesus and you realize what Jesus has done for you, bringing the bottle is also breaking the bottle, and you will do what it takes to get close to Jesus. You're not going to worry about who's looking at you, who's snickering at you, who's watching you. You're not going to worry about any of those things. You're going to say, this is my Lord. I'm going to get to as close to him as I possibly can. And I don't care who says what. I'm going to break the bottle of societal expectations and norms. Be close to Jesus. But then we know the story because it says that she broke the bottle and poured it on his head. In other versions of the story, it talks about her letting her hair down. It talks about her wiping his feet. It talks about all these things. All of these things are things that happened. Everybody's telling the story from the different perspectives that they see this happening. And there she was. She knew what had happened in her life. She knew where she'd come from. She knew how many demons had been exorcised from her. And now she's in the very presence of Jesus. She had not been invited. She didn't get the hottest ticket in town. She didn't get this thing, hey, I get to be around Simon, who caused me to sin, but he's also a leper, but he's also supposedly healed from, and forgiven as well. Praise God that God forgives both sides of the story. Praise God that God forgives both sides of the story. No? She didn't get invited. But she says, I know where Jesus is tonight, and I'm going to dinner. I'm going to dinner. You see, Jesus had been knocking on her heart's door and brought her into acceptance in his life, and he didn't care if she showed up. And she knew it, but he didn't care if she showed up. There she was in the very presence of God, knowing that Jesus would accept her. He'd always done that. He always said, let the little children come, let other people come. He is the one that touched lepers. He's the one that touched and made himself supposedly unclean by touching lepers. He's the one that had touched dead bodies and made himself ceremonially unclean by touching dead bodies. She knew he didn't care who was there because he operated under a different set of rules in society. One time Jesus is the one who said, let the little children come. One time I had a pastor that told me how embarrassed they were. Their little child, during the time when the pastor was up preaching, their little child had walked up on the platform because the mother had lost track of him or something like that, and the mother had walked up onto the platform, and they were all embarrassed because their little daughter is disrupting the service. I said, don't worry about it. That little kid didn't disrupt the service. Just pick him up and keep right on preaching. It's okay. See, that's what Jesus is. He's like, nothing disrupts him. When he knows people are coming to Jesus, he'll stop. The lady who touched the hem of his garment, he goes, whoa, we're stopping right now. We're not going another step further till I have a conversation. Jesus stopped in the middle of pain on the cross, and he said to the guy on the side, he says, hey, by the way, you're going to be with me in paradise. You see, he stopped in the very act of saving you and I to make sure that guy knew he was also saved. This is the kind of God that we serve, that he says, break the bottle, do whatever you want. She broke the bottle. She was overwhelmed with all that Jesus had done, and she knew that she had done that she had something very valuable. She had her 401k. She had whatever reason she had it. Desire of Ages says that she bought it to anoint him for his funeral. She brought it that night to anoint him for his death. The Desire of Ages says. So there she was. You know how some people, especially when my wife and I have been on a plane a lot lately, and
You know, there's a lot of things that happen on an airplane. And there's a few people that we've been next to that we wish they had been wearing perfume because they weren't. And it was a long flight, and it was like challenging, to say the least, right, Wilma? A little challenging. No deodorant. It's challenging. But then other people go the other direction, right? Because they sometimes you walk by and it's like, whoa, whoa, whew. That perfume was way too strong, right? In my mind, the way this happened is that she thought, I don't know what she was thinking, but it's like this. Sometimes when you start, when there's a smell that enters the room, be it good or bad, it doesn't just like explode into the room. In my mind, it's what happened is these men were sitting there talking politics. They were talking, they were talking about the Roman government and how much they hated, and they were talking about, Pilate. They were talking about the last thing they saw a terrible soldier do. Whatever they were talking about, they were having this conversation. She's over here breaking the neck off of this bottle and pouring it on Jesus' feet, and it didn't just enter the room like an explosion, but it was like as they're talking, all of a sudden it's like, where's that coming from? And in the dimness of the room, they look over, and here's this woman who's broken this bottle. She's like, whoa, that really smelled strong. That was way too much. She's trying to clean it up. And before they know it, everybody is staring right at her. Dare she be here? What is she doing here? What gave her the audacity to come into this room in the first place? Do you know who she is? And by the way, what is she doing spilling that all over the place? That's expensive stuff. That's wrong. That's not good. She could have sold it, given the money to the poor. She's a little embarrassed. But I love what Jesus does. Because in verse 6, he says, let her alone. I love the fact that Jesus is in our corner and he deals with the bullies of our lives. Leave her alone. Why do you trouble her? She's done a good work for me. You have the poor around you always. Whenever you wish, you may do them good. Me, you do not always have me always. Leave her alone. You've been bullied lately by the devil, or whatever is troubling you, by bothering you. I don't know what it is in your life. But when she went all in, and there was nothing holding her back, there was nothing that stopped her. There was no more. She had no more security blanket. No more earthly security blanket, let's say it that way. Her 401k was gone. Her retirement was gone. Her profession was gone. Because she had gone all in with Jesus. She broke the bottle. Yeah, she still had bullies in her life. There was no turning back. The bottle was broken. She was all in. Have you ever noticed? You know this, not a notice, but when you break things, it exposes what's inside. Broken bottles spill their contents. In this case, the contents was spikenard. Broken bottles show what's inside. And let me tell you something. There were some other bottles that needed to be broken there that night. First of all, she broke bottles by just entering the room. She physically broke the bottle, but there were some other bottles that needed to be broken that night. There was the bottle of critical spirit that was bottled up inside of these men. This bottle of judgmentalness, of self-righteous attitude, this bottle of I am right and I'm justified because I can think of better ways to spend your money than the way you spent your money.
These are bottles that needed to be broken with the men that night. You see, the bottle that she broke filled the room with this beautiful aroma, but the bottles that they were carrying was stinking up the place. The bottles they had were filled with bad stuff. Think of bottling up a skunk smell or something like that. Whatever. Just use your imagination. My wife tells me I shouldn't be too graphic, so I'll be careful. She lectures me sometimes in a very positive way. She helps me out. I appreciate that. She always tells me, don't get too graphic, Doug. And she's right. So here we have this bottle, these bottles that were stinking up the place, self-righteousness, judgmentalness, criticalness, suggesting how everybody else should do their business so that they won't be looking at me and doing my business. I love that recently I was reading about this Twitter war that was taking place. And I'm not on Twitter, so I don't know, but there was this article about this Twitter war that everybody was attacking Elon Musk, world's richest man. And they were attacking him about how he's not spending his money to help the poor. Now, you may have your opinions about Elon Musk. That's not the point. And maybe he could spend his money in different ways. But the fact of the matter is they were using it to deflect attitudes from them, helping them in their own way. I love the story of the little boy who was out walking and he sees all these turtles, the baby turtles that are headed to the ocean. And there's birds attacking them, and the birds are picking up the turtles and eating them. And he's trying to save the turtles and scare away the birds. And there's so many of them, and he's picking up the turtles and he's hustling them off to the ocean and tossing them in so that they would be able to swim away free. And some guy comes along in their wisdom of an adult wisdom and says, "You're not going to make a difference in the lives of these turtles." And he tossed one more in the ocean and he says, "I did in that one. Made a difference in that one." You see, we can be filled with these attitudes, these bottles that we bottle up our own little things, and we look around at our neighbors across the aisle, we look at our neighbors across the street, we look at our neighbors that we work with or whatever we do and say, "Well, I sure wouldn't do it that way." See, those are bottles we need to break ourselves. There were bottles there that night that needed to be broken, and Jesus pointed them all out. You leave her alone. In another version of the story, he tells the parable about who loves me more? Who loves more? You see? Quit worrying about everybody else's bottle and deal with your own. That's what this story is about. First of all, let people walk in, and if they're breaking the bottles of societal norms because they can get closer to Jesus, let them get closer. You ever hear the story about the bum that comes walking in half drunk, and he comes walking into church because he stumbles into church, and he walks in and he walks right up the front aisle and he sits down right there because he wants to. What's going on? He doesn't sit in the pew. He doesn't. He's filthy. He stinks. He comes and he sits right there. Everybody's like, "Huh? What's that guy doing here?" Bottles of self-righteousness and criticism were rampant in church that day. Then one of the grizzled old elders stood up from the back of the church. You could see him kind of making his way slowly down the aisle. Everybody's going, "Yeah, he'll deal with that bum. That old drunk that came walking in. Show him." The old elder got up to the front, sat down on the floor beside the bum. The bum was breaking societal bottles, and the elder says, "Look, I don't care where you come from. I'm going to come sit with you." You see, we all have bottles, and my question that you have as you think about it, as we draw this to a close, my question for you is what bottles do you have in your life? Don't be looking around, thinking about everybody else's bottle. The question is what bottles do you have that need to be broken in your life? What bottles do you have that need to be broken? Because I submit to you that when you bring your bottle to Jesus, if it's stinking up the place, that when you break it, Jesus covers it with the sweet-smelling aroma of grace. Says, "I got you covered. Got you covered." So the question is simple as you go home today. The question is simple.
bottles do you need to bring to Jesus? Break. Give everything. So there's no security blanket between you and God, no earthly security blanket. Just you going all in, breaking every single thing that might be holding you back. That little secret thing, a little secret corner of your heart, bottle needs to be broken. That's the question for you.